A probe by the Special Investigating Unit into procurement fraud for personal protective equipment has found no evidence to prove that presidential spokesperson Khusela Diko was indeed involved in wrongdoing. Now, our political editor Spungalwa sat down with President Cyril Ramaphosa and asked him about the status of Khusela Diko.
There is a cloud hanging over your spokesperson. She took leave of absence a few months ago. She has not been charged for any crime and is not directly implicated in any corruption, yet she's still on, she's on leave. What is the status of Khusela Diko in the presidency, and when will the issue be finalized from your side?
Well, firstly, the SIU is still busy with the process. They have issued an interim report. They are supposed to issue a further report that deals with the matter. She is still on leave, and there are processes which the SIU has said we need to look at and deal with, and all that is going to carry on until we deal with this matter as effectively as possible. She herself is concerned about it, and so am I. So we are going to deal with the matter as clearly and as directly and as effectively as possible. And where there has been lapses or wrongdoing, that will be dealt with without any shadow of doubt.
Just to note that the presidency also announced yesterday that the SIU found that Khusela Diko had failed to disclose her financial interests and now faces an internal disciplinary process to determine whether she is indeed guilty of contravening public service regulations. Let's unpack the story now. We're joined now for some analysis by Professor Lesiba Tefo, who is on the line to us from Mokopane this morning. Professor, good morning. Always a pleasure talking to you here on the AM Report. There is certainly, some concern from various quarters that Khusela Diko is being investigated, or at least was being investigated before the SIU's announcement yesterday, for something that her husband is accused of. Khusela Diko and her career paying an incredible price here.
It's a bit confusing for me, because I don't know exactly what charges would be proffered against her. Supposing it's because she's married to the chief. Right. What is the marital regime that they opted for? For if it is out of community, and out of community without accrual, again it says she has no obligation to declare that type of relation with attendant benefit from the tender process that is now controversial. But having said that, if indeed because she is implicated based on the ANC policies and procedures and decisions taken that thou shalt step aside, it's implicated, that's a different matter. But when we talk about a job, let's distinguish her job, her employment contract, and her political affiliation and all that goes with it in relation to conduct and behavior by members.
I mean, there's this thing we always talk about with stories like this. It's the optics, isn't it? If there is this perception that, your husband stands accused of something as serious as fraud in the procurement of personal protective equipment in the midst of a pandemic, is the perception, are the optics enough to have resulted in this kind of action against Diko?
Yeah, well, perceptions are perceptions, my dear, and are very, very subjective. And indeed, they also can have immense influence on certain things. Let her not be found guilty by association with her husband. Let her rise and fall on her sword based on her conduct. But in this instance, I think it is being stretched too far. It's more political. If indeed it relates to a contract of employment, yes, the president has something to do with it, right? With other parties as well. It's a pity it's about Diko. But how far, if you were to go political, would this matter go anyway? You had VBS, what became of it? You had the PPEs. I mean, the storm is dying out, is fizzling out. And one is beginning to think, like many others, nothing is going to come out of it. Shall she be given a space to continue with her life? And if indeed she has to answer for certain things, let it be due to her, not due to her husband's conduct.
Very interesting also, Professor, that I think you alluded to just a moment ago, is that The party at the time of the height of the PPE scandal in our country last year, also the height of the pandemic at that time, there was some massive involvement by members of the ANC, several allegations being leveled. And yet, as you say, no arrests being made. Is the ANC, with this announcement, trying to give the impression that it is cracking down, as it promises on several occasions, as it would, on corruption?
Well, you can try to placate people and you can try to pull them at one stage, but it cannot be all the time. People are less gullible today than it was the case yesterday. All I'm saying is that there is skepticism, there is cynicism that anything serious would come out of this as long as the big shots are implicated. Remember, there are many who would say the VBS saga, the PPE saga, only the small fish is what we are talking about. But the benefits in the main also went to the party. They were just pawns on the chessboard, conduits and facilitators to enable the party to have some revenue. That argument you cannot run away from, and indeed is what muddies the water and ensure that very few would ultimately brought to book. Yes, there will be a few, especially of lesser stock. That indeed we have seen also. With that now, the doctor Masuku, who I don't think was an incompetent fellow as alleged, but somewhere there had to be some people who can be seen to have at least fallen on their sword or action taken against, just to give some semblance of credibility.
Professor, do you see it as problematic as well that this is the reason why we know what the latest is on Khusela Diko is because of a media inquiry? There's been no communication from the presidency by itself before yesterday.
It would have died a natural death like many similar scandals and problems or challenges that they often face. But again, the tenacious, robust media we have, I think, is the bulwark of our democracy. Let them continue to do exactly this. Be it against me or against anybody, but the democracy gets strengthened when you have strong institutions. And the fourth estate that we have in this country for now, I think, is doing a wonderful job. Here and there, they may miss the mark, but in the main, I think it's worthy of a celebration.
Prof, before we let you go, do you see a scenario where Khusela Diko is reinstated in her position? I mean, after the SIU closes this issue one way or another around Ms. Diko not disclosing her financial interest. They say that is the latest issue they are now looking into. Beyond that, do you see a scenario where she's reinstated?
Yes, reinstated is another word, but she would be redeployed. You know how we play with words, especially when we become to be politically correct. They can't go far enough to fire her, either from the party or from her employment. I think her contract of employment certainly would protect her, because I don't see what it is that we're talking about in relation to that. But she certainly will be placed somewhere, and that will take the heat of the presidency and any other person who has to do with her. That's a prudent thing that I think they should, or I would advise they do, and I know for a fact they would do it.
Professor Tefo, thanks as always for your time this morning on the AM Report. Professor Lesiba Tefo joining us there on the line from Mokopane this morning.